That night in Seattle, the cold felt sharp enough to bite through bone, but the sudden kick from Patrol Officer Ryan Cooper cut deeper than the wind, sweeping through the darkened streets. His polished black boot sent the cardboard sign flying from the hands of the shivering man, curled against the wall, turning what onlookers assumed was just another homeless soul crushed by the city into something far more complex, because no one knew that the man gasping for breath was actually Captain Ethan Miles, an internal affairs officer who had quietly vanished from his downtown office to take on a mission whose brutality even he could not have predicted. 3 weeks earlier, Ethan had left the small home where his wife and daughter were used to seeing him in a crisp uniform, choosing instead to sink willingly into the harsh world of those who had no name and no address. The worn clothes, rain-soaked shoes, and ripped backpack were all he carried as he stepped into the identity of Michael Ward, an unemployed veteran wandering the edges of Pioneer Square. The disappearance from comfort did not frighten him. What frightened him was knowing that to expose Ryan Cooper, he would have to endure the same things the vulnerable had suffered for years. To drag a predator into the light, he had to live inside the darkness that predator created. On his first night on the streets, Ethan realized just how thick that darkness was. On the stone steps outside the Harbor Haven Support Center, he watched weary faces blur into one another through the smell of cigarettes mildew and quiet groans of bodies that had nothing left to give. When the screech of police brakes tore through the air, the entire crowd recoiled. Eyes trained by years of harassment dropped instantly to the ground, each person trying to disappear. Ethan understood why. Ryan Cooper's arrival never meant safety. Cooper stepped out of his cruiser with a swagger, the black gloves on his hands making them look like claws, eager to crush something. His cold gaze swept across the crowd before locking on to Ethan as if discovering a perfect target. Ethan kept his head low, but beneath that disguise every sense sharpened. The moment had come. The attack was inevitable, and he had to let it happen. Just as he predicted, the kick slammed Ethan's back into the brick wall, the pain sharp enough to steal his breath. Agony rippled through his ribs and blurred his vision for a moment. But at that same instant, the micro-recording device hidden inside his coat activated, capturing every word. Cooper barked every scrape of his boots against the pavement, even the cruel laugh he let out. To the people nearby, it was just another scene in a city that had become numb to suffering. But to Ethan, it was evidence. The beginning of an ending. Cooper never saw coming. Pressed against the wall, Ethan caught the faint reflection of streetlights rippling in a puddle at his feet. He saw the filthy face of Michael Ward, but beneath the dirt and tangled hair was the gaze of Captain Miles, the man who once led internal affairs strike teams and dismantled the most intricate corruption networks, now forced to swallow humiliation like so many abandoned souls on the sidewalk. The feeling did not diminish him. It reminded him why he was here. Cooper hovered over him like a triumphant predator, certain the man beneath his boot was a nameless nobody. He had no idea he had just assaulted the one person capable of ending his career with a single report. The plot twist had already begun. The man who believed he held all the power was unknowingly writing his own downfall. Ethan did not respond. He simply pushed his hands against the cold stone, rising with the trembling posture of someone too exhausted to defend himself. But inside that aching chest, his resolve hardened like steel. This night was only the first trial, and he knew the truth, that to defeat someone who wielded authority as a weapon, he had to descend to the deepest parts of the darkness that man had built. When Cooper finally walked away, Ethan's breathing came in broken, painful bursts, threatening to bring him to his knees. But as the officer's heavy steps faded into the night, Ethan closed his eyes. It hurt, yes, but pain was exactly what he needed. The first piece of evidence, a warning to himself that this battle would be more brutal than anything he had faced before. But he would not retreat, because in this city, far too many people had no one to stand for them. And Ethan Miles had just become the first person to say they deserved protection. Dawn broke over Seattle with a pale light, the thin morning fog wrapping around the old buildings of Pioneer Square, like a cold scarf. Yet even that chill felt gentler than the throbbing ache still lingering in Ethan's chest after last night's kick. Around him, the homeless were still curled beneath thin blankets, trying to steal a few more minutes of sleep before the city woke and began sweeping them off every doorway and sidewalk. Ethan opened his eyes, feeling every muscle tighten, every breath scrape like fire. But instead of despair, a steady, quiet resolve spread through him. Pain was always the best teacher, especially when it showed him exactly what the victims before him had endured for so long. He sat up, pulling the torn coat closer to his body, his cold hands trembling slightly as he searched for the sign that had been kicked from his grip. The scribbled words, "Veteran needs help," now carried a few more stains. But that grime made his role even more convincing. A forgotten man, nameless, invisible, unclaimed. A shadow on a crowded street. The opposite of who he really was. Captain Ethan Miles, the man whose name alone once made corrupt officers tremble when it appeared in an internal affairs report. He walked slowly along the sidewalk, observing and listening to the stories floating around him. Hank Doyle, with tangled silver hair and calloused hands from collecting cans, approached and handed him a leftover sandwich from the night before. His voice was rough, but warm. "He came at you again last night, didn't he?" Michael Ethan nodded slightly. Hank sighed, his deep, weary eyes full of bitterness. "Ryan Cooper. That man is a walking nightmare. Anyone who meets him remembers it forever." Ethan understood. The lowered gazes, the way people pressed themselves against walls whenever they heard the rumble of a police engine, all were living proof of a system rotting in the places few ever looked. When Hank walked away, Ethan leaned against the stone wall and quietly activated the micro-recorder hidden in the lining of his coat. He checked the signal. A soft static crackled, then stabilized. The device had survived last night's impact, and relief washed over him. One threat, one insult, one kick. Every piece was evidence when placed correctly in the final report. In the stillness of early morning, a memory rose sharply in his mind, the memory of the secret meeting before he went undercover. Chief Karen Blake had stood before him in the small internal affairs room, her eyes heavy. 3 deaths in 8 months. All linked to Cooper. Complaints vanished. Cameras conveniently broken. We cannot ignore this any longer. Detective Jenna Holt flipped through files beside her. "He's too confident, Ethan. He thinks no one will touch him. We need someone he won't recognize. We need a ghost." And both women had looked at him. Ethan knew he wasn't just the reasonable choice. He was the only choice. Now standing amid the faint smell of watery coffee from the corner shop and the distant hum of the streetcar, he felt the weight of his mission more than ever. Only by becoming someone who had lost everything could he hear the things ordinary people never would. Every face here bore the mark of Cooper's fear. But beneath that fear, Ethan sensed something else, a quiet solidarity, small acts of kindness, the kind of fragile humanity that real life often lacks. As the first rays of sunlight touched the old rooftops, Ethan saw Linda Perez step out of the Harbor Haven Center carrying a pot of hot coffee. Always exhausted from too little sleep, Linda still greeted people with a gentle smile. She handed Ethan a paper cup, asked nothing, and simply murmured, "Take care of yourself. Cooper won't stop." Ethan looked at Linda, then at the people lining up behind her, and realized his mission had grown larger than its original purpose. It wasn't only about bringing down Cooper. It was about proving to these people that someone was finally standing with them. A police car rumbled past. The engine noise made several people flinch. Ethan tightened his grip on the coffee cup, the heat spreading into his frozen palms. He didn't know when Cooper would return. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty: every encounter with him would deepen Ethan's disguise, and every moment would bring the truth closer to the surface. The people here lived each day fearing they could be erased like trash on the sidewalk. But if Ethan succeeded, they would realize this darkness wasn't permanent. And the man sinking into it beside them, pretending to be weak, was the only one capable of breaking the power that had crushed them for far too long. Ethan drew a deep breath, the pain in his ribs pulsing like a reminder. This was only the beginning. And behind the calm of this morning, the shadow of Ryan Cooper was already growing warning of the storm to come. The afternoon settled over Pioneer Square in a wash of yellowed sunlight filtering through the old trees, but that fragile calm did nothing to hide the tension twisting in Ethan's chest. He had spent enough time living inside the street's unwritten rules to understand what outsiders never grasped: fear. Here was not a scream. It was silence. Silence born from being threatened so many times that speaking became dangerous. Silence thick as fog, clinging to every story, every glance, every breath. Ethan sat on the stone steps adjusting his cardboard sign as if it could shield him from the trouble creeping closer. The smell of cheap food from the corner stall mixed with the damp reek of trash stirring his nausea. But he did not move. Everything had to look natural. Every gesture had to mimic a man who had slept on sidewalks for months. Every expression had to hide the truth that beneath the wrinkled coat sat an internal affairs captain who once led dozens of corruption busts. A pair of footsteps pulled him from his thoughts. A thin man pushed an old shopping cart toward him. Hank. He placed a few empty cans into a bag with slow, weary motions, as if his body had grown so accustomed to exhaustion, it no longer recognized anything else. Then he looked around and lowered his voice. "Michael, did you hear Maria Thompson has been missing for 2 days? Someone said they saw her crying behind the parking lot alley and no one has seen her since." Ethan's body tensed. Maria. The small, gentle woman who lived in a battered old Civic, whose eyes always seemed ready to spill tears. Yet she still tried to smile whenever someone handed her bread. He had noticed her from the first week, a person with no means to defend herself. The perfect target for Cooper. Ethan asked softly, "Who said that?" Hank darted his gaze left and right as if afraid someone might overhear. "Linda. She said there were new footprints in the dirt near where Maria parks. Nobody cares, but I'm scared, kid. Every time Cooper shows up, something happens." Ethan's heartbeat tightened, not from fear, but from cold dread. The kind that crawls up your spine when you know something terrible happened before you could stop it. He did not jump to his feet, did not move too fast. He only pressed his lips together and nodded exactly like a powerless homeless man would. But behind that defeated expression, his mind was already calculating. Maria had disappeared. Maybe she fled the city out of fear. Or maybe he did not want to finish the thought, but his mission forced him to face that possibility. Just then, the rumble of an engine echoed from the end of the street. A pickup truck pulled up in front of Harbor Haven, its bed filled with meal boxes. Linda Perez stepped out, moving faster than usual. Her face was strained, her eyes red from lack of sleep. She had not seen him yet, but one glance at her posture told Ethan everything. Something was very wrong. He rose slowly, pretending to adjust his collar against the cold. As she passed, he spoke. "Linda, is something wrong?" She startled, then sighed. "Michael, did you hear about Maria?" Ethan nodded. "Hank said she's been missing for 2 days. Linda pressed her lips together, her voice trembling. "I went to look for her. I only found her medication scattered all over the ground like someone threw it on purpose. And her car was dented. I called the police, but they just said she probably left on her own. Nobody wants to deal with anything involving the homeless." Ethan felt the familiar heat of anger rise. Not anger at the mission becoming harder, but because he had seen this pattern too many times. When a victim had no social standing, their disappearance was downgraded into not a priority. Cooper understood that perfectly, and he exploited it without hesitation. Linda looked at him, worry clouding her eyes. "Michael, you pass that parking lot often. If you see anything, tell me, okay?" Ethan nodded. "I'll keep an eye out." But as Linda walked away, her tired smile fading the moment she turned, Ethan understood this was no longer just an investigation. It was a race against time. Cooper was escalating, victims were disappearing, evidence was being erased, and the only person who could bring him down was someone he believed unworthy of even a second glance. Captain Ethan Miles sat back down, arms crossed over his chest, his gaze knife sharp. Cooper thought he was weak, thought he was invisible, but the pieces were coming together. And the final picture would ensure Ryan Cooper never stood back up again. That evening, as the shadows of the high-rises stretched long across the streets, Ethan sat with his back against the stained brick wall beside the Harbor Haven Center, his hands folded against his chest, like a homeless man trying to cling to whatever warmth remained. But beneath that stillness, beneath the appearance of resignation, his mind spiraled into a familiar memory. The secret meeting inside the sealed internal affairs room where everything had begun. The room had been so quiet, the hum of the ventilation fan sliced through the silence like a blade. Chief Karen Blake stood before the data board, her expression so severe it seemed to compress the air itself. She pushed a stack of files toward Ethan, her voice short and sharp. 3 deaths in 8 months, all during Ryan Cooper's shifts, every report altered, and the security cameras. She paused, her gaze darkening. Always broken at the exact moment they mattered. Ethan opened the file, and the photographs on the first page made his fingers stiffen. Bruises, fractured ribs, eyes emptied of life. People with no families, no advocates, no one demanding justice for them. And because no one demanded it, the truth had been buried more easily than anywhere else. Detective Jenna Holt, slender but with eyes sharp as steel, stood with her arms crossed. "Do you know the worst part?" she said, voice blunt. "There are no witnesses, no evidence, no one dares speak, and when they do, they're dismissed as unreliable. He is shielded by the silence he created." Ethan closed the file, feeling a weight press into his chest. Even before stepping onto the streets, he could already see the darkness Cooper had built around himself, a darkness that could only be torn apart from within. Chief Blake looked directly at him, her eyes a rare mix of trust and fear. Ethan, you are the only one who can do this. Not because you are the best, but because you know how to bend down and listen to the people no one listens to. You don't see them as cases. You see them as human beings. Jenna stepped closer, her voice lowering. We'll monitor from afar. But we need to be honest, this mission isn't like any undercover work you've done. You won't just play the role of a homeless man. You will have to live like one, eat like them, sleep on the pavement, feel the fear they live with every day. If you want to break Cooper, you have to enter his world from the position of the victims he thinks are the weakest. Ethan said nothing. He knew better than anyone the cost of missions like this. The loneliness, the slow erosion of identity, the blurring line between who you are and who you pretend to be day after day on the sidewalk. But if he refused, who would take his place, who would protect the people the city had decided were invisible? Chief Blake placed a new folder on the table. This is your identity. Michael Ward, former veteran, no family, no medical records, a man no one will notice when he disappears. The final sentence dropped the room's temperature another degree. Ethan looked at the carefully altered portrait inside. Even he almost didn't recognize himself beneath the scruffy beard and tangled hair. It wasn't Captain Miles looking back. It was a man who had fallen out of the world long ago. Ethan took a deep breath and asked, "When do I start?" Chief Blake answered instantly, as if she had known he would say those words. "In 3 days. You will have time to change your appearance, lose weight, and adapt to street conditions. Jenna will be your only contact." And Ethan, she paused, her voice sinking, "If Cooper discovers you, no one can guarantee your survival." In that moment, Ethan looked at the two women who had stood beside him through countless operations. They were capable, determined, but this time they were sending him into a battle with no defensive line. He would have to sink to the very bottom of society to hunt the monster hiding behind a polished badge. Back in the present, Ethan tightened the small note hidden inside his coat lining. Jenna's handwriting. A steady nightly check-in signal. He watched the streetlight reflecting in a puddle, his distorted reflection staring back. The face of Michael Ward. In that darkness, he heard Cooper's footsteps approaching from afar, cold, sharp, arrogant. The footsteps of a man who believed the entire neighborhood existed under his rule. Ethan exhaled slowly. The mission had begun the moment he lay down on the pavement. But tonight, seeing the wary eyes of the homeless around him, he recognized a purpose far greater than the one written in his assignment. It was not just about taking down a dirty cop. It was about reclaiming a voice for those who had been forced into silence for far too long, and that he would see through to the end. The next morning, Pioneer Square woke beneath a thick, biting cold that seemed intent on holding everyone against the damp pavement. Ethan stood under the worn awning of an old laundromat, long since closed, his hands buried deep in the pockets of his torn coat. Everything on the street moved slower than usual, as if the entire city were holding its breath before something inevitable. But he knew the storm was coming, and its name would be Ryan Cooper. He walked toward the narrow alley behind the diner, the place Hank had said Maria was last seen. Tire marks, scratches on the wall, and shattered medications still littered the ground. Maria's diabetes pills, essential to her survival, had been crushed like trash. Ethan stared at them for a long moment, trying to imagine the scene, Maria trembling as she bent down to gather each pill while Cooper stood above her. His face blank, his eyes stripped of humanity. His fist tightened his chest, burning partly from last night's injuries, partly from a surge of anger rising like fire. Ethan was not someone who angered easily. Internal affairs had trained him to stay calm, to analyze, to let logic override emotion. But in this world of people who had no voice, logic often felt like a luxury. He crossed his arms, listening to a soft sound behind him, a pair of slippers dragging against concrete. Then a short sigh. Linda Perez. She approached carrying a bag of relief supplies, clutched tightly in both hands. Her face was drawn from exhaustion, her eyes heavy. When she saw Ethan, she gave him a weary smile. "I figured you'd be looking for Maria, too." Linda sat beside him, the faint smell of thin coffee lingering on her coat. "When Hank told me, I knew something was wrong." Maria always kept her distance from Cooper. But that day, her voice caught. Someone saw him walking toward the lot right after Maria turned off her lights. Ethan didn't react strongly, only nodded, staying in character. But Linda looked at him as if she sensed something deeper behind his eyes. "There's something you're not telling me, isn't there?" Ethan turned away slightly, tugging the brim of his cap lower. "I just worry about her." Linda exhaled shakily. "Ryan Cooper is the reason we built a silent watch network around this area. Anytime he shows up, people alert each other right away. But he's getting worse." She looked down at the crushed medicine on the ground. This isn't a small problem anymore. At that moment, the sharp sound of a police engine echoed from the end of the street, slicing through the air. The homeless around them instantly tensed, shrinking back, like a flock startled by gunfire. Ethan watched every face, every panicked glance. They weren't afraid of the cold or hunger. They were afraid of power, twisted into a weapon. The patrol car wasn't Cooper's, just a routine unit. But the shadow of Cooper hung over the entire block, making people sweat despite the cold. Linda stood patting Ethan's shoulder. "If you hear anything from the others about Maria, tell me. Someone like her, she can't disappear without anyone asking." Then she hurried off. Her steps fast and tight, as if moving too slowly might let something terrible strike again. Ethan watched her go, his mind circling around one word: disappear. No body, no message, no trace. In the cases he had handled before, disappearance was often the first step towards something far worse. He returned to the sidewalk and placed the Veteran Needs Help sign in front of him. A simple disguise. Yet who would ever imagine the shivering man crouched at the curb was Captain Miles, the officer who once exposed some of the most vicious, corrupt cops in the force, the only one willing to walk straight into the heart of darkness without blinking, as the first raindrops hit the awning. Above, Ethan lowered his head, but his sharp gaze stayed alert beneath the shadow of his cap. This was no longer a simple assessment mission. This was a battle to reclaim existence for the city's forgotten souls. And with Maria's traces still etched into the dirt, Ethan knew the enemy had crossed the final line. The only question left was, would Cooper stop here? Or had he only just begun midday, reached Pioneer Square with a pale, thin sunlight, the kind that settled over the streets like a damp cloth, warming no one and only deepening the exhaustion already seeping into every breath? Ethan leaned against an old lamppost, the Veteran Needs Help sign set in front of him, his eyes half closed like someone trying to fade into the quiet shadows of the city. But beneath that cover, his mind turned slowly, like a wheel grinding over gravel, each scattered detail of the Maria Thompson case, beginning to form into something dangerous. He was so lost in thought that he didn't notice the hurried footsteps until Linda Perez appeared beside him, breathless and flushed from running up the block. "Michael, you need to come to the distribution line now. Something's happening." Ethan pushed himself up with the sluggish awkwardness of a startled homeless man, though a sharper alertness flickered in his eyes. He followed Linda, stepping through patches of weak sunlight on the concrete past faces, lowered in shame and hunger as people waited for the free lunch. And then he saw him. Cooper. The man stood in the middle of the line, not as an officer doing patrol, not as someone checking in, but like a ruler inspecting his territory. His gaze slid over each person clutching a plastic bag, as if they were weeds in his way. Linda tugged Ethan's sleeve gently, and he understood why she had rushed to find him. 2 children were in the line. A little girl gripping a frayed scarf and a boy glued to their mother's side, blinking rapidly from fear. The young woman held them close, desperately trying not to draw Cooper's attention. But he had already noticed. Ethan felt his heartbeat shift. This was different. Cooper had never targeted children before. If he crossed that line, the situation would spiral beyond control. Linda tried stepping forward. "Officer Cooper, you cannot keep demanding to search everyone like this. There is no law that allows you to." Cooper turned, his voice slicing through the air like a long blade. "You again, Perez. This place is crawling with trash. I am cleaning it up. If you don't like it, step aside." Ethan saw Linda's teeth sink into her lower lip, but she remained standing tall. "This is a licensed food distribution program. They're only here to get their meal. No one is causing trouble." Cooper let out a short laugh, lifting a food container as if it were dirty. "You call this distribution? Look at them. They take the city's food and sell it for drug money. That is why this area never improves, because of people like them, and people like you, feeding them." The line recoiled inward. The air tightened like a guitar string about to snap. Ethan stepped forward half a pace, his voice strained but staying true to the role. "Sir, they just want to eat. No one." Before he could finish, Cooper pivoted. "You look familiar." He narrowed his eyes. "Ah, there you are. The unemployed veteran. The one who complained I kicked a little too hard last night." Ethan felt several people glance toward him, fear spreading through them like fire catching dry paper. Cooper walked closer, each step heavy, as if he expected the ground itself to bend under his boots. "Michael Ward, isn't it? Hand me your wallet." Ethan handed over the fake wallet, forcing his hand to tremble like a man afraid of being detained. Cooper opened it, examined the worn paper, and chuckled. No improvement at all. No job, no family, no worth. A burden in every sense. Linda snapped. "You have no right to search his belongings. This is not a lawful check." Cooper faced her, wearing the smile of a predator deciding which part to tear first. "I have the right to do anything if I see a threat. And I see plenty of threats here." A silence fell across the entire street. Ethan felt a boundary shift. Cooper was no longer simply asserting power. He was hunting. He wanted domination, absolute and humiliating, to force them into the deepest fear so he could control them. And then, just as Ethan braced himself to step in and stop Cooper from digging further, Hank's voice trembled from the end of the line. "Stop it, Cooper. They just want a proper meal." Cooper turned his head very slowly, the kind of slow that made Ethan's heart miss a beat. Hank had done the one thing no one in their situation dared to do, confront him directly. Ethan moved quickly, stepping slightly between Cooper and the older man to redirect the officer's focus. "Sir, he didn't mean anything by it. He's only Cooper. Cut him off with a thin smile. It's fine. I'll deal with each one of you. And you, Michael, it's time I find out who you really are. In that instant, Ethan knew Cooper had begun to suspect him. Not enough to expose him, but enough to start watching, enough to start digging, enough to turn every step Ethan took from this moment forward into a minefield. Linda moved in front of Ethan, placing herself between him and Cooper. He is a good man. He helps people. And you. Cooper stared directly at her. The stare of a beast that had locked onto its next prey. Ethan saw it. Linda saw it. And for the first time since he came to the streets, Ethan felt fear, not for himself, but for the people beside him, the ones who had no idea they had just become witnesses to a predator losing control. A predator wearing a police badge. Night fell as quickly as a switch being flipped, pulling all of Pioneer Square into a quiet darkness that was anything but peaceful. Puddles reflected the blurred glow of street lights shimmering like the uneven breaths of the homeless trying to survive one more day. Ethan sat against the dusty window of an abandoned storefront, his body aching from the confrontation with Cooper at the food line. But what truly tightened his chest was not the bruise. It was the look in Linda's eyes when Cooper stepped toward her. The look of someone who understood she had just been marked as a target. He closed his eyes briefly, trying to steady his breath, but the memory of the afternoon surged back like a wave. Cooper standing in the crowd, crushing the dignity of the helpless, with just a few insults, and worse, shifting his hunt. He was no longer simply suppressing. He was stalking. Ethan slowly opened his eyes and looked toward the Harbor Haven Center. The homeless were settling in to sleep, each person wrapping themselves in thin blankets, as if trying to dissolve into the darkness and hide from the world. As he walked toward them, he saw Hank crouched beside a lamppost, his expression uneasy. He motioned for Ethan to come closer. "Have you heard, Michael?" He went back to the west side, searched 3 people's stuff, drove 2 others out of the area. Hank glanced around, then lowered his voice. "And he asked about you." The words froze Ethan in place. It had begun. The final piece he had been waiting for had moved. But that brought no relief. If anything, it confirmed Cooper had sensed something wrong. The way he deliberately said the name Michael Ward in front of the crowd earlier was not the swagger of a victorious bully. It was a probe. Ethan sat beside Hank. "What did he ask?" Hank shrugged his voice, trembling slightly. "Just where you usually hang around, where you sleep." Harmless questions on the surface, but those eyes. Hank shivered. It was the same look he had when he watched Maria last week. Maria. Her name cut through Ethan's thoughts like an icy blade. He looked toward the alley leading to the parking lot where the remnants of her disappearance still lay scattered. No body, no witnesses, no explanation. But in the neglected corners of this city, when someone vanished without a sound, the ending was rarely hopeful. Ethan knew he could not let history repeat itself. Linda stepped out of the center, carrying a box of old files, her small frame tense, yet holding itself upright. As she approached, Ethan saw the exhaustion etched into her eyes. All day long, she had shouldered the hopelessness of the community and the invisible threat named Ryan Cooper. She sat beside them, lowering the box onto the ground. "These are the reports people filed about Cooper's harassment. I kept a personal copy because she swallowed hard. Many records have gone missing." Ethan opened the files. Shaky handwriting rushed notes, clumsy descriptions filled with fear. Names he had met, faces no one remembered. Each page was proof of a horrifying truth. Cooper had oppressed this community for so long that they believed no one could save them. Linda looked at Ethan, her voice small but sharp like metal heated for too many years. "I don't trust the police anymore, but I trust you, Michael. You're different. You see us as human." The words struck Ethan like a weight. He did not deserve that trust. Not while he was still hiding his identity. Not while every word he spoke was part of an undercover lie. But that trust was also the reason he understood. This mission was no longer just an assignment. It was a promise. He opened his mouth to reply, but Linda gently placed a hand on his wrist. "You should be careful. I saw the way Cooper looked at you. Like she hesitated, like you're the first threat he's met in years." Ethan looked into her eyes. "You're right. And that is exactly what will make him slip." A faint, thin smile crossed his lips, the kind of smile worn by someone who knows they're standing on the edge of danger and chooses to keep walking. Linda shook her head softly. "I don't want anyone in this city to have to be a hero." But sometimes, her voice dropped to a whisper. Sometimes one person standing up is enough to make the darkness retreat. Ethan said nothing. The night wind swept across the damp sidewalk, carrying the scent of exhaust, despair, and something else, something looming. He closed the file, his hand tightening around it. Tomorrow, Cooper would return, not to patrol, to test him, to follow the scent of danger he had caught. But he had no idea the man he was hunting was not a broken drifter begging for loose change. He was Captain Ethan Miles, the officer who had brought down men far more cunning than him. A predator had begun to sniff at the edges. But this time, the prey knew exactly who he was, and he was not running. The next morning did not arrive gently the way people hoped it would. It came with the sound of Harbor Haven's metal door being slammed hard, with screams echoing from the east alley, and with the sharp chill running down Ethan's spine the moment he opened his eyes. The instincts of a seasoned officer warned him everything from last night had only been the beginning. Today, Cooper would make his real move. Ethan pushed himself up from the cardboard sheet beneath him, every muscle aching as if reminding him how completely he had become the role he played. He tugged his coat tight to hide the fresh bruises, then stepped onto the sidewalk. The homeless community was clustered together in small groups, the fear in their eyes unmistakable. Hank emerged from the crowd, his eyes red, as if he had not slept at all. Michael Hank whispered, his voice breaking. "You need to see this." He grabbed Ethan's sleeve and led him behind the parking lot where Maria's traces still stained the ground. But today, there was something new, a long drag mark across the concrete, as if someone had been pulled away. Hank trembled. Just before sunrise, I heard someone scream. When I ran over, all I saw was a figure getting into a police car. Ethan froze. In that instant, he could smell the truth. Cooper was growing bolder because he sensed he was close to being exposed, and the only way he knew to protect himself was to erase anyone who could become a witness. Maria was one. Who would be next? Ethan turned back toward the center. Linda Perez stepped outside, her face pale. She held a stack of files, but her hands shook so hard the papers rustled like dry leaves. "Michael, he questioned me about you early this morning. He asked where you sleep, how long you've been here, what state you lived in before this." Ethan felt each word land like a stone. Cooper was no longer suspicious. He was confirming. He was digging. And the terrifying part wasn't that he might uncover the truth. It was that he wouldn't wait until he confirmed it to strike. Cooper appeared as if summoned by the fear, settling over the street. His car screeched to a stop, headlights cutting across the wet pavement. The door opened and his polished boots hit the ground with the confidence of someone who believed he owned the entire block. He walked straight toward Ethan. Dozens of eyes followed, tension choking the air. Michael Ward. Cooper dragged out the name as if carving it into the space between them. "We need to talk. Alone. Now." Hank tried to step forward, but Cooper brushed him aside with a cold glance. Linda moved too, but Ethan shook his head very slightly. No sudden moves. No one else must get pulled into this. Ethan followed Cooper into the narrow alley, a place with no witnesses and no cameras. Cooper stopped in the center of the cramped space. His voice was low, dangerous. "You are more interesting than I expected, Michael. Too quiet, too observant, too clean. Strange for a homeless man." Ethan kept his breathing steady. "I just try to survive." Cooper laughed softly, the laugh of a predator who has caught the scent of something more challenging than prey. "Do you know what I hate most? People who think they can fool me?" Ethan said nothing. His eyes stayed locked on Cooper's, steady, but not confrontational. Cooper stepped closer, his breath heavy with menthol and arrogance. "I think you're hiding something, and I will find out what it is. If you won't talk," he paused, his eyes glinting, "I'll ask someone else. Linda, for example." The words sliced into Ethan like a razor. Not because Cooper threatened him, because he aimed directly at Linda. Ethan shifted his stance slightly like an animal back to the edge, but refusing to back down. His voice was quiet, controlled. "I have nothing to hide." Cooper narrowed his eyes. "That's the problem. Everyone has something to hide, except you, and that makes you dangerous." Before Ethan could speak, Cooper shoved him lightly at the shoulder. Not enough to injure, but enough to send a message. From now on, power was not in investigations, files, or laws. It lived in the hands of a man who could beat arrest or erase anyone he wished without consequence. As Cooper stepped out of the alley, the streetlight cast a sickly yellow glow across his face. He turned back once, eyes gleaming with triumph. "From today on, I'll be watching you. Every single step." Ethan remained in the shadows, his breath slow in the cold air. His shoulder ached, his legs numbed, his heart weighed down. But beneath it all, one truth flashed like a sharpened blade. Cooper had revealed his fear, and any predator that reveals fear is already on the brink of a fatal mistake. Ethan stepped out of the alley, finding Linda waiting with Hank. He clenched his fist lightly, the wind tugging at his worn coat. The hunt had officially begun, but the one being hunted was not him. Afternoon slid into Pioneer Square under a heavy shade of leaden gray, as if the sky itself sensed the tightening darkness closing around the homeless community. Gone were the scattered conversations of previous days. Gone were the rough, tired laughs of people trying to salvage a shred of hope in the cold. What remained was silence. A thick, lingering silence stretched thin like the breath of a predator waiting to strike. Ethan noticed it the moment he stepped out from under the awning. The averted eyes, the hurried movements. People avoided forming groups, avoided looking at one another for too long. After what happened that morning, everyone understood one truth. Ryan Cooper had sensed something. And when a man like him began to suspect, every living soul around him became a target. Hank Doyle was the first to approach. He sat beside Ethan, his back hunched as if trying to make himself as small as possible. You cannot stay here tonight. Hank murmured, his voice nearly dissolving into the wind. He asked where you sleep. He asked me. He asked Billy over there. None of us said a word, but Hank glanced toward the parking lot. Everyone knows he'll be back. Ethan placed a hand on Hank's shoulder. I'll be fine. But his eyes drifted farther down the street toward the dark stretch where Cooper often appeared, toward the corners he had turned into his personal hunting grounds for months. Deep in Ethan's chest, a familiar ache pulsed, not just from bruises, but from responsibility. Linda Perez emerged next. Her old coat wrapped tightly around her small frame. She scanned her surroundings as if fearing someone might be listening. Michael, I need to tell you this. Her voice trembled. One of the people I look after, Mr. Howard Cooper, forced him into a police car before noon. No one has seen him since. He was not causing trouble. He was just, she bit her lip, just homeless. Ethan felt the blood in his veins turn cold. Another disappearance. The pattern was unmistakable. Anyone who caught Cooper's attention, anyone who triggered even the faintest suspicion, was being removed. If Cooper believed Ethan was connected to anything at all, he would eliminate everyone who had spoken to him. Cooper no longer wanted to control the block. He wanted to erase the evidence, erase witnesses, erase every trace of those who might threaten him. Linda looked at Ethan, her eyes restless, searching for a truth he could not reveal. Michael, he's looking for you. I know you don't want to trouble anyone, but if something happens to you, who will speak for us? Who will say the things you've been trying to say for us? Ethan lowered his head. Pain shot through his shoulder, but Linda's word cut deeper. She was right. He had brought hope to them without ever telling them his real name. He had let them trust a false identity, a person who did not exist. And now they faced real danger simply because they stood beside him. At that moment, the screech of hard braking echoed from the street. That familiar sound, sharp as steel, heavy as warning. Hank and Linda both flinched. Cooper's patrol car. Ethan rose instantly, his hand brushing the hidden communication device sewn into his coat. Every nerve in his body tightened. It's him, Linda whispered, as if speaking the truth everyone feared. He's back. Just then, Meredith, the elderly woman who always knitted scarves at the corner, rushed into the center, her face drained of color. Cooper is tearing through everyone's belongings. He says there's an off-list stranger hiding among us, and everyone has to prove they've lived here long enough off-list. Ethan understood immediately. That meant him. Cooper had changed tactics. No more silent hunting. He was tightening his grip publicly, forcing the entire community into panic, waiting for someone to slip. The predator had scented the presence of prey, and now he wanted to make the whole herd run so he could catch the one he wanted. Ethan looked at Linda and Hank. They stood trembling beside each other, aware the storm was coming, yet unable to escape it. Others gathered too, eyes filled with dread. They looked at Ethan as if waiting for him to say something, anything that might calm them. But he couldn't. Not when he was the epicenter of the danger approaching. Ethan walked toward the exit, his outward movements slow and weary, just another homeless man dragging himself through the cold. But beneath that disguise, Captain Miles was calculating witness position's line of sight, Cooper's angle of approach, and the worst-case scenario, the possibility he would have to reveal himself. He did not want to, but the situation was forcing his hand. As he neared the main street, Cooper's voice cracked through the air like a whip. Everyone stand still. Anyone without a temporary shelter card will be taken in. Order is something you people clearly do not understand, so I will teach you. Ethan clenched his jaw. Cooper was pushing this community to its breaking point. But he did not know that the breaking point was the exact moment Ethan Miles would refuse to stand aside any longer. And the darkness Cooper had used to conceal himself was about to be split wide open right here in the neighborhood he thought he owned. Night fell over Pioneer Square beneath a thick veil of fog, cold enough to feel as though it could slice through skin. The city was still alive with noise on the larger streets, but in the hidden corner where the homeless community lived, the air felt frozen. Ethan stood tucked beneath the awning of an old building, listening to the heavy footsteps of Cooper drawing nearer. There was no whispering anymore, no murmurs from the people around him. No one dared lift their head. No one dared breathe too loudly. Cooper's arrival always carried the shadow of disaster, but tonight that shadow was so dense, Ethan could feel it pressing against his skin. Cooper stepped out of his patrol car, the polished black shoes striking the wet pavement with sharp, unpleasant thuds. He did not need to shout. He only needed to glance. And instantly the crowd bowed as if forced down by the wind. His gaze swept slowly over each face, each possession, every trembling hand clutching a blanket. But when his eyes reached Ethan, another silence formed. Deeper, sharper. Michael Ward. He released the false name like an accusation. "Come here." Ethan stepped forward, forcing himself to maintain the trembling posture of a man with nothing left to lose. But in his mind, Captain Miles calculated every detail of Cooper's movement distance, angle, the position of the crowd, the speed at which a weapon could be drawn. Cooper could attack at any moment, and Ethan knew it. Cooper feared him, feared the thing he could not yet name, and that fear made him more dangerous than ever. Cooper moved closer, his eyes darkening. "You always show up exactly where trouble happens. Coincidence? Or are you looking for something?" Ethan lowered his head, his voice hoarse like a worn-out drifter. "I just want food, officer. I am not causing trouble." Cooper laughed the cold laugh of a man who believed he held absolute power. "Is that so strange? Because I heard you have been asking questions about Maria and about Mr. Howard." Ethan felt the ache in his left ribs tighten. The officer was pulling out those names to test him, not to investigate, to hunt. Cooper wanted to see if the prey would flinch, but the officer did not stop there. He leaned in, his breath reeking of menthol and arrogance spilling across Ethan's face. "Tell me, how does it feel watching the people around you disappear one by one?" The air froze. In the distance, Ethan heard someone inhale sharply. Probably Linda. She stood clutching her box of files, her gaze locked on what was happening. Cooper's eyes flicked toward her, and in that swift glance, Ethan saw what he truly wanted. Not the truth, not control, but Linda's fear. Ethan could not allow him to take another step in that direction. Before Cooper could speak again, Ethan raised his head. Just for a moment. One direct look, no lowered gaze, no cowering. A mistake for Michael Ward, but a declaration for Cooper. The officer's eyes narrowed instantly. He said nothing, but Ethan knew that single moment had cracked his disguise. Cooper had seen the steel beneath the shattered exterior. He had sensed something impossible, and he stepped back, just one step. But it was enough. Enough for Ethan to understand that Cooper had finally detected the presence of his real enemy. Not the trembling drifter he had mocked, but the man hidden beneath him. The man capable of destroying him at the root. Cooper lowered his voice, speaking in a hiss. "Tomorrow you will show me your papers. If you do not, you are coming with me. I will find out who you really are." Ethan stood still, heat rising behind his eyes with restrained fury. Not because he was threatened, but because Cooper still believed he was someone who feared threats like that. Cooper turned away, but before stepping back into his car, he lifted his head and projected his voice across the block. "I am cleaning this area. Every last one of you." The car door slammed. The engine roared, and the vehicle disappeared into the fog. Ethan did not look away until the last echo faded. Linda rushed toward him, her face pale. "Michael, he knows. You have to leave. Now." But Ethan shook his head. "No. If I go, he will go after someone else. Maria. Mr. Howard." Then he looked at her. "You." Linda froze her lips, trembling at the truth laid bare. Ethan looked around him. The frightened faces. The fragile hope. The people erased from society, yet still standing here, holding on to the thinnest thread of survival. He knew he could not walk away. Not when the darkness had grown right in front of their eyes. Tonight, Ethan Miles understood something he could no longer postpone to protect them. He would have to risk revealing who he truly was. And when that happened, the confrontation between him and Cooper would no longer be a hunt. It would be war. From the perspective of a specialist in professional ethics and public accountability, Ethan Miles's story reveals an undeniable truth. When power falls into the wrong hands, it can become a weapon that destroys an entire vulnerable community. Yet from those very darkest moments, the actions of a single individual willing to step into the shadows can become the anchor that allows light to return. If you believe that justice must be protected not only by the law, but also by courage and truth, please like and subscribe so we can continue sharing stories that move, challenge, and awaken. And before you leave the video, leave a short comment of just 2 or 3 words as your own affirmation. Stand up.